Now then, welcome to our regular Curiosity podcast, the CuriosityCast. Every episode, we take questions asked by members of the public in Hull and try to get them the best answers from the very best brains in the city of Hull. Not all questions are about Hull. They can be about whatever you want to discover. There are three of us in this room. Only one of us would be able to put up a hand when I say, have you had a mountain named after you? Have you had an ice stream named after you? Have you run the University of Hull? That would rule out me and Dave, which by the process of elimination would bring us to our guest on the Curiosity Cast today. His name is David Drewry. He's a Grimsby lad. He lives locally in the East Riding. And all those things I said were true. This is all about questions from the public, but I'm going to ask one, given his background. I'm just going to check. Have you got all your digits? Because a man like you might have lost digits over the years. Please explain, David.
Well, it's very nice to be interviewed on this occasion, and I'm very happy to answer that. Fortunately, all the digits work, but actually they don't work as well as they should. Because, if you're working in very, very low temperatures, down at -40, -50, you wear protection. But every now and again, if you're using instruments, you have to uncover your hands and you get frost nip and they get cold. And actually, I'm suffering from a little bit of that sort of degradation of my fingers, over all these years.
Well, I think it's happening to me as well. And I've never been anywhere near the Antarctic. We should explain. David was the director of the British Antarctic Survey from 1987 to 1994. He is professionally a glaciologist, and there's not many of them about locally, and geophysicist. So let's get to the questions. This is from Paul in HU3 in the city centre, because I mentioned it at the top. How can I get a mountain named after me? Please explain the mountain.
Well, that's it's a privilege and something that sort of suddenly zooms out of the ether towards you. The official way this happens is because Antarctica has a landscape. It's got mountains, glaciers, which some people have never seen. Still parts that nobody's ever really seen or stood on. And so it's a whole continent waiting to have names attached to the features so that we can, understand where we're going and what's attractive. Oh, we ought to call that by a name that describes it. Or maybe somebody was here that we ought to commemorate that's historically important. So there is a formal process. And in the UK, we have the Antarctic Place Names Committee.
Oh, yes.
And it's a public body run by the government. And anybody can go onto their website and they can see that they can propose a name for a feature. They can be a descriptive name, or it can be a personal name. But they've got very clear criteria as to how then they are selected. And by and large, it has to come down to, if it's a personal name, you've got to have contributed in some way to science or understanding or something really that's important in Antarctica. And not to say that I did, but somehow I got a name. And all the major countries working in Antarctica, of which there's around about 30 different nations, most of those have a place names committee. And they go through this process and then they share their names and then it's all agreed at international level. And my mountain was named by the United States Place Name Committee and my ice stream or glacier was by the UK Place Names Committee.
So we've got Mount Drewry, and what's the ice stream called?
The Drewry Ice Stream.
Oh, right. I like the sound of that. Do you put that on your CV?
There's
probably not. I've looked at your qualifications. Probably not enough room.
We could probably get a swamp named after you. Swamp Burnsy.
Just a passing puddle after a heavy shower of rain.
Can I ask stupid question number one?
This is Dave, the producer.
On Antarctica, are all the mountains made of land, or is there any that are made of ice? Is there any ice mountains?
Well, most of what we would call mountains are genuinely mountains. I mean, one of the really interesting things is that we have one of the longest and most impressive mountain ranges in the world. You know, the problem is that Antarctica is always on the last page of the atlas, isn't it? You know, very small scale. And if you've got a globe, it's always stuck where the pin is, you know, and you can't see it. And if you've got one of those inflatable globes, it's where the mouthpiece is. So either you can't see it or you're blowing into the Antarctic. So it's difficult to know, I think, for most people what the landscape's like. There's two huge domes called East and West Antarctica. And they rise up to 4,000 meters high. I mean, that's
big stuff.
Big, yeah, it is. It's as high as Mont Blanc. And these huge domes, I mean, East Antarctica is the size of Australia.
Wow.
You know, and then West Antarctica is a bit smaller than that. And so those are domes, and they're called domes because that's the shape of them. But where the mountains are, this great long chain, 4,000 kilometers right across from the side south of New Zealand, right across to the South Atlantic side, stalking right across the continent. I mean, these mountains are up to well over 4,000 or more meters high. Very, very impressive.
So have you been to the top of Mount Drewry?
No.
Right.
I've seen it.
Right. Not on the bucket list? Or is it? It's.
I mean, it would be very difficult, and I mean, I'm not trying to get a privilege to go and see my mountain. If I happen to be in Antarctica, I would.
There's a sentence I do. If I happen to be in Antarctica, like I was just nipping by, you know.
But the interesting thing is that this mountain is on the side of the Beardmore Glacier, and that historically is so famous because that's where Shackleton and Scott trod and trudged up this 200-mile-long glacier on their way to try to conquer the South Pole. So it's redolent of names of lots of historical people from those expeditions.
I'm fascinated. Again, one of my questions, and I only apologise to people who've sent questions in even. I will get to them. How did all this come about? What was the fascination for you? And how do you end up at Antarctica as a 12-year-old boy? That's where I want to get. What's going on?
Well, I was always interested in outdoors, nature, natural environment. And so, you know, at school, you focus on studies like geography. And I was lucky enough that my school did geology. And so I took those as well as other scientific studies. And then when I got my A-levels, of which those were included, I wanted to go to university and study all of this, earth science, which is what I did. And at the end of my first year at university, one of my lecturers said, David, he said, you're interested in all of these sorts of things, but there's a guy over in engineering, a lecturer, who's going to take an expedition to Iceland. Are you interested? So like a sort of, bat out of hell, I was straight across to the engineering department. I met this man, and he wasn't going to Iceland. He was going to Greenland, which was even more exciting. So the next year, I spent 2 months deep in East Greenland in a fantastic area of mountains and glaciers, and I knew that's where I wanted to be for the rest of my career.
And you did, and so how much of your life have you spent out there then, in frozen wastelands?
Oh, I've never counted the months or whatever, but I mean, my wife, who keeps the record, says that when we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, it should only have been 20 years because I'd spent 5 years away.
Fair enough. Matty in HU5 in the Avenues area of Hull to the CuriosityCast. Does living in Antarctica ever get comfortable?
It's all relative.
Right.
What is comfortable? If you are out, as we have all done in the Antarctic, working there, been out in tents, we still use the same tents that Scott used. The design was perfect because they're pyramidal, and when the wind blows, it pushes the tent into the ground.
Right.
Anyway, you can be in there, and you've got every facility that you need. You've got high-quality sleeping bags. You've got excellent quality clothing. The food rations are worked out for calorie intake. You cook it yourself, but it's very straightforward. And if you're working out in that environment, you're comfortable, in yourself as well as what your living circumstances are. On the bases in Antarctica, it can vary. Now, we lived for a few days because it was terrible in a rundown hut on an American base, which we called Vermin Villa. Not that there was vermin there.
There'll be reviews on TripAdvisor.
But it
lovely view of Mount Drewry.
But you can imagine, it was not a nice place. But we were then in a bunk rooms, and there was also, we were in sort of basic hotel accommodation. It all varies, but wherever you are, because you are in this exciting, remote, and really extraordinary environment, you're comfortable in yourself because that's where you are.
I've got to ask, what are you actually doing? What are you all doing there from all these countries? What are you hoping to achieve?
Okay.
Is that a stupid question?
No. All these countries are there to undertake scientific research. That is the raison d'etre. That's the real purpose of countries being there. Besides, of course, saying, we're interested in Antarctica, whatever in the future, politically or whatever happens, we want to have a say in it. But they're there undertaking science. All range of things, from marine biology in the oceans around Antarctica, looking at whales, seals, looking at the plant life, looking at krill, the center of the food chain, which is so important to our world, to people on land studying the ice like I did. The huge ice sheets. How thick is it? How fast does it move? Is it changing with climate change? Is it shrinking, growing? What's going on? And is it important for the rest of the world? And there are people, of course, studying humans there, human biology in these extreme environments. And the atmosphere, not just weather, but way up into the ionosphere, into the stratosphere, because it's the polar regions where, the aurora, which we've had some spectacular occasions to see it in this country in the summer, the aurora is magnificent there because this great flow of what we call plasma, charged particles coming from the sun, they're driven down along the magnetic field lines of our planet. The Earth's like a magnet, north and south poles, magnetically, and they all converge at the poles, and that's where you get these fantastic auroral displays.
Have you discovered anything that surprised you? You weren't expecting, or something that you were expecting one thing and the opposite is true?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, the research that I was doing was we were flying a radar system that saw through the ice, and does. It's still the technique today. It sees through the ice, so you can fly along profiling the land underneath and how deep it is. So we're discovering mountain ranges, plains that nobody's ever seen before, and nobody's likely to see for many thousands of years. But there it is, a whole landscape. But what we discovered at one point was this really strange return that we got, really strange reflection from the bottom. And we worked out that this flat, strong reflection was from a lake, a huge amount of water down below 4,000 meters of ice in the middle of the coldest continent in the world is a lake. And the largest,
a frozen lake?
Liquid lake, liquid water. And this water we found in many other spots, but the largest lake that we found is the same size as Lake Ontario in the Great Lakes region of North America. Vast lake. And the reason it's water is that the cold from above can't get all the way down through this ice to the bottom. And the heat from the earth is coming up and it just balances it. So the bottom of the ice is melting and you've got this lake.
Fantastic.
You're looking at me and you're listening to me, gasted, flabbered, or flabbered, gasted.
There's no chance of getting through to it and digging down that far and seeing what's in there.
Yes.
There is?
There is.
Oh, Dave.
Yeah, and the real issue, of course, is what's in the lake. Because we know it's several hundred meters deep. It's huge. Is it fresh water? Is it salt water? And is there life in the lake? Mm-hmm. Because this has been sealed away for probably several million years.
And is that, don't leave us hanging.
And there are projects to drill in. I mean, as soon as it was discovered, it sits underneath a Russian base. And the Russians were drilling for ice to look at climate. And they were drilling down, and they stopped because internationally a group was put together to work out how to get into the lake without contaminating it. And it took round about 13 to 14 years of discussion as to how to do this. And the Russians then did a test. And what they did was they drilled down. They have the technology to get down almost 4,000 meters to just at the level of the top of the lake. And the pressure of the water underneath broke through, and the water filled the tube, the hole where they had drilled down, to about 100 meters, the pressure release. Mm-hmm. Of course, it froze. Yeah. And then they went back down and drilled out the ice that had frozen, because that was the water from the lake. When they got it back, they discovered, sadly, that there was contamination from drilling fluids, that they'd been so careful, to do this. And so to date, we haven't got a sample of the water, but we know we can do it.
Seriously.
Watch this space. Watch this space.
You're listening to the latest episode of the CuriosityCast. You can send us your own questions on anything, and we'll answer it either in the next podcast or in the content you can find on the Curiosity social feeds. So message us at www.curiosityhull.co.uk or find Curiosity Hull on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. Our guest on this episode of the CuriosityCast is David Drewry. He's got a mountain named after him and an ice stream named after him in Antarctica. He's born in Grimsby. I am, lives in the East Riding. He was the director of the British Antarctic Survey from 1987 to 1994, vice chancellor of the University of Hull from 1999 to 2009. And we're working our way through the questions here. Jane in South Holderness in HU12. Bear in mind, a lot of these questions come from children. When you work in Antarctica, how often do you get to come home?
Well, there's good news and bad news on this.
Right, okay.
And maybe the bad news for the people back home is that you could be away for 2.5 years. At the Antarctic Survey, we would have people who would do 2 winters. And if you then incorporated the travel by ship or air, it's probably 2.5 years from home. But of course, today we have modern communications. You can email. We have those sort of facilities. So it's much better. When I first went down, you had no communications. You had very, very, very crude radio communications. And if you had some aeroplanes coming in, you could send maybe a letter out every sort of month or whatever like that. Other people may go down for shorter periods because they want to do a study for a few months. So they do that. And if you're on a ship doing research around the margins of Antarctica, you could be there again for months sailing on the ships. It's very rare that people would actually go down for a shorter than a few months because the cost, the travel, all of the logistics is such that it doesn't make it worthwhile.
You must have very understanding people at home, all the people that go out there.
You sort of cultivate an idea of calm in these people so that when you leave and you'll say, I'll see you in 2 years' time. But I mean, there are cases of people I know years ago who came back after 2 years and they had never seen their son or daughter who'd been born while they were away for 18 months. Wow. That was the first time they saw them.
Mentally, it must take a different sort of person to do that. This in from Andrew in the Beverley Road, Newlands Avenue area of Hull. What luxuries do you miss when you're in Antarctica? It's turned into desert island discs.
This I found a really difficult question because, we don't look for luxury in the Antarctic. We're just there to do our work and everything is basic. So what would I miss? I'll tell you 2 things. First of all, fresh vegetables. We have frozen and whatever, but fresh vegetables. It's not a luxury, but it is in the Antarctic. Mm-hmm. The other one, I really thought about this, and that was going to live music.
Yeah.
You know, we can get everything taped or on CD and those old-fashioned things, and we can get them streamed. But live music, you can't do it.
No, the bands don't really tour down there, do they?
Well, the Arctic Monkeys go the other way, don't they?
Yeah. So, good question.
Right.
Good question.
What sort of live
still,
music?
I mean, these days you'd have MP3 players and all the rest of it.
Oh, yeah.
When you first started, did you take cassettes?
Yeah,
albums?
that's right. Yeah, we had cassettes. But these days, some people take, you know, they may have a musical instrument and they'll take it with them. And they'll play, and they can improve their performance.
That sounds awful.
I think it must get really annoying.
I want a ukulele for Christmas.
Sit next to a bagpipe player.
Yeah. Fortunately, some of the rooms are quite well insulated.
What live music were you missing? Is there a particular genre or an artist that you wanted to?
Well, I really do enjoy classical music, and I go to lots of concerts and whatever. But the other thing I miss is I quite often listen to Yorkshire brass bands.
Yeah.
And they're fantastic, you know. I mean, whenever there's some of the old mining bands and other ones going on, I head out there because they're just terrific.
They'd never stay in tune down there, would they? They'd be contracted and all that kind of stuff.
That's very good musical knowledge there. And climate knowledge.
Freeze your brass bands off.
Very good. This from Dixie in HU6. And I'm going to get educated here. I always do on the Curiosity Cast. What are volcanic explosions like in Antarctica? I'm educated because I didn't know there were.
There's volcanoes under there.
All right.
Well, fortunately, I've never experienced one in Antarctica. But I mean, although it's the coldest place on Earth, we do have some volcanoes. And the Antarctic Peninsula, you know, that's that snaking area south of South America, is a volcanic zone. And over millions of years, there have been volcanoes there. You know, remember, the volcanoes occur where you get these tectonic plates coming together. And creating this activity. Where I was based for quite a lot of time, south of New Zealand in the Ross Sea, we've got an island called Ross Island, and it's a volcanic island, and we've got two volcanoes on there, Mount Erebus and Mount Terror. And Mount Erebus, which is just under 4,000 meters high, 3,800 meters high, it's quiescent. But it's got a huge crater, about a kilometre across, at the top of this huge volcano, rises out of the sea on this island. And there's always a plume of gas and smoke coming out of the top. And once we've got lots of seismographs around to sort of see what is going on, it's not likely to erupt. But that's an ever-present reminder that there is volcanism. And actually, we also know from those radar measurements and things that we were doing that there has been volcanic activity under the ice, under 2,000 or 3,000 meters of ice. So it's an interesting question.
So you might not feel it on a daily or monthly basis, but you're constantly aware that it's there.
Oh, yeah, you can see the volcanic mountain. It's there, and there's a lot of them.
Are the mountains, Erebus and Terror, named after the boats, or the boats named after the mountains?
Ross Island is named after Sir James Clark Ross, who went down in 1838 to 1842, one of the great explorers. He got into the Ross Sea, named after him. Ross Island is named after him. And Erebus was his main ship, and the Terror was the other ship.
Yeah.
And of course, those are the ships that also went with Franklin to try to find the Northwest Passage. And if you can recall, he was lost, the ships were lost, and then a few years ago, the Canadians discovered the Erebus, sunk in one of the waterways in the Northwest Passage. That's the same ship that this mountain's named after.
This next question, I don't quite know what Mick is thinking, but we'll ask it anyway. I don't know whether he works or in the field or not, or he's just a schoolboy that's fascinated by it. But what happens to your waste in Antarctica?
I wonder if he means your rubbish, your wrappers, or does he mean your waste?
Well,
he certainly doesn't mean with your waste around your belly. It's
yes.
WASTE.
Of which there's a lot round here.
Yes.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, your waste can go out because of good food and it go in if it does. But this sort of waste. Yeah, I mean, everything from plastics, all the packaging, all the way up to buildings have to be considered when they have filled their life to be removed because they're waste. And it all goes down to human waste, poo. And so there is, under the Antarctic Treaty, a procedure called the Environmental Protocol. Some people say it's the Environmental Protocol because they have to cover that.
We like it.
But all of these things have to be taken out that come in. And old bases that were there before this protocol came into force, people are going back and then tidying them up or removing them. And so it's really, really important to get those materials disposed of and taken out of Antarctica.
A sensible question, then, actually.
Yeah, Mick, thank you very much for your question. Joanna, I've got one more question to come, but Joanna says, is there anywhere around Hull where I can see the effects of glaciation?
Absolutely.
Is there? Oh,
yeah.
Right, okay.
Holderness. Now, way back, 18,000 years ago, there was a huge ice sheet that covered all of northern England and headed down towards London, but didn't quite scrape it off. Anyway, it came across from the North Sea from Scandinavia, all part of a big ice sheet. And this ice sheet brought rocks and dirt from Scandinavia, scraped bits off the North Sea. It came onto land in East Yorkshire. And when it melted about 10,000 years ago, it left all of that, what we call moraine or boulder clay, all the way along those cliffs. You go from Withensea all the way up towards Bridlington on those cliffs, which are eroding, of course. You can see the clay that was formed from being scraped by the glaciers, and the boulders in there are from Scandinavia.
Right.
So go out and see it.
Fascinating.
Joanne?
I thought you were going to say more North Yorkshire, because you can imagine it places like that.
Joanne, good question. Thank you very much. I'm just going to throw another one in because I tend to do that and I tend to sit here. Climate change, you mentioned earlier. Where are you at with it? Is it going faster or slower than you expected for all your time out there? You seen the visible effects of it?
Yeah, and I should declare that I've served on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change because of the Antarctic, and its ice is a fundamental part of the climate system. And, of course, if all that ice melted, sea level would rise by 60 meters around the world. That is a really scary scenario. And this ice is melting because of climate warming. And the bottom line is that even if we get to net zero, even if we hold the temperature to 1.5 degrees, which personally I don't think is possible, it'll go up to 2.5 degrees by the end of the century, this ice will continue to melt in Antarctica. And we've seen the evidence of it. I've seen it over the years. We've been able to see how it's changed. And that means that there's no way of stopping its contribution to sea level.
Right.
And the Antarctic, Greenland, another huge ice mass, not half as big, and all the mountain glaciers around the world contribute half of world sea level rise at the moment. The ice is responsible for half the sea level rise, which is about 20 millimeters per decade.
So are we literally up a gum tree? Might that be the only place to survive, up a gum tree or a tree or wherever?
Up. And of course, here we are in Hull, the second most vulnerable city in England after London. There's a whole discussion we could go on about that, but we have to be aware of it. It's not going to stop.
Normally, I like to end on a positive note.
I don't think it's possible. We're all doomed.
But we're not going to on this one. David, it's been absolutely fascinating, and we thank you for your time. And I suspect we've only just scraped the surface. And I've no ambitions to go to Antarctica. I'm even more scared now. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us on the latest edition of the CuriosityCast. Don't forget, if there's somebody you want us to talk to, or if you've got a question, do let us know. You can find the content on all the Curiosity social feeds. You can message us at www.curiosityhull.co.uk or find Curiosity Hull on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. Our thanks to our guest David Drewry. Thanks to you for finding the CuriosityCast.